The recent reveal of NBA 2K21 and its various special editions has caused a little bit of an uproar, not because of the game itself or even its special editions, but because of a price difference between its current gen and next gen versions. The Xbox One and PS4 versions are going to cost $60 like pretty much every major game has since 2005, while the Xbox Series X and PS5 versions are going to cost $70. This is raising a whole lot of different questions, including things like, is this a price increase that other companies are going to be going with? What does this mean for games that are going to make use of smart delivery from Xbox? So let's just kind of break down some of those individual things. And I also just want to talk about how, while a price increase like this kind of sucks, it's not really that surprising. First off, is this price increase a universal decision? No, at least right now it doesn't appear to be. There's already been interviews circulating as far as other companies talking about their stance on raising prices like this, and it does sound like it is a decision a lot of other companies are currently wrestling with, whether or not they want to standardize a higher price for their games, but it is not something that is just quite yet set in stone. And a large reason for this is because of this exact situation of a game that is coming out on a current gen and next gen system, which is where a lot of confusion comes up for something like Xbox Smart Delivery. This is one of those features that Microsoft has been really pushing for Xbox Series X, where if you buy a game right now for a current gen Xbox One and a better version of that game comes out for Xbox Series X, well, they're just going to give you the better version of it when you move on to that new system. However, Smart Delivery is not a universal feature. It's not something that every single cross-generational game is going to support. It's something that specific games will allow, for instance, Cyberpunk 2077. It has already been clarified that NBA 2K21 does not support Smart Delivery, so if you buy it on Xbox One, you're not going to get the Series X version as an automatic upgrade. For the games that do support this feature though, especially those that are designed for Xbox Series X in the first place, there's this kind of waiting question of, well, is it going to be 60 on one system, 70 on the other? Is it going to be 60 on both? Is it going to be a 70 on both? Obviously, we don't know yet. I would think the main approach would be to have one standardized price across both versions, whether that's going to be a game that is 60 on both because it was originally planned for Xbox One, again, like Cyberpunk, and maybe some future games like Halo Infinite being 70 on both systems. Now again, this price increase is not a universal decision just yet, but I would not be that shocked if over the next few years we see more and more companies shift over to that price. They're not necessarily all going to be $70 at launch with the Series X and PS5, but you could see a lot of titles that are, right now selling for 60 eventually go for 70 when new versions come out 2 or 3 years from now. Of course, this is a move that is not going over super well with a lot of people on the internet. After all, lots of people are used to paying $60 for a big-name AAA game as kind of the standard price, and it's been that way for 15 years, so the thought of having to spend $10 more on every single game you buy, that's a number that adds up pretty quickly in your head and isn't the greatest sounding thing. The thing is though, and this is an argument that's been brought up time and time again whenever we look at things like price increases in games or just price increasing in technology, is that really, games have actually been cheaper nowadays, at least when it comes to launch prices. See, $60 has been the standard price for most games since 2005, at least for Xbox and PlayStation. Nintendo stuck with $50 on the Wii for a while and didn't move up to $60 until the Wii U. Before then, during the PS2, GameCube, and original Xbox, $50 was the standard, and before then, well, it was actually a lot more chaotic. Especially when it comes to the SNES and N64, prices for games were actually quite a bit higher in general. Seriously, look back at a lot of old listings for game sales back in those days. A lot of games at launch were varying between $50 and $70, which is interesting, I think, for 2 reasons. First off, the fact that $70 was normal back then when the dollar was worth a lot more, but also that there really wasn't a standardized price. Game prices varied a lot more heavily. You see that a little bit today now, but it's kind of a accepted thing depending on whether it's a big name company or a small indie studio, or if it is a big name company, there's some reason why it is being sold at a lower price point, either because it's like a standalone DLC title, like what they did with Uncharted Lost Legacy. It could be something that's, a multiplayer dedicated game that has in-game microtransactions like Overwatch had, although it did have a $60 version that was, bonus stuff in the game. Or it could be a title that is meant to be kind of retro love letter and is smaller in scale in general, like what Capcom did with Mega Man 11. The point is that while games going up to $70 is certainly a price increase as far as what we're used to paying right now, it's actually not that crazy high relative to the standard value of a game. I mean, especially if you look at, say, 2005 is when $60 became the standard. Well, when you account for inflation and how money's value has actually changed over time, $60 back then, at least in US currency, is now worth almost $80. So really, increasing it by $10 still brings it lower than what the value of those games back when the 360 launched were. Now, there is one argument that I see a lot of people make in response to the whole concept of inflation, which is, yes, prices have been static since 2005, but something else that has changed is how often we have DLC. DLC has become way more common across a lot of games, whether it's adding actual full new storyline additions, adding new playable characters, or just adding new fancy hats you can wear. We're used to spending a lot more in total for a game than we used to, because back in the days of the SNES or N64, you would buy a game and that was it. In the case of a lot of games today, though, you can buy it, you could buy some additional in-game items, you could buy season passes, battle passes for multiplayer games. A lot of times a game might be $60 at launch, but in the end, you're really spending something closer to 80 or 90. And in some cases, like Mortal Kombat 11, if you bought every single piece of DLC as it was released, and not later on when it was bundled for much cheaper, that's a $120 game. Given there are some older games that kind of live through this example, a good choice would be something like Street Fighter on the SNES, which had 5 different versions, and you were paying full price each and every single time. And in the PC world, expansion packs were a thing, it's just they weren't so broken up into multiple smaller sizes. Now, I know it sounds like a lot when you say that, a current game can be somewhere between $100 and $120 after all that DLC, but again, if you look at how games cost in the past and you account for inflation, well, an SNES game for $70 back in 1995 is $117 today. And the fact of the matter is, not only has the value of the dollar changed as years have gone by, but the overall production costs and what goes into making a new game, especially a AAA one, is just getting more and more expensive. What this really makes me curious about is whether or not this $10 price increase is going to be universal in the long run, and if it's not, are we hitting a time similar back to the older days of games where there wasn't really a true standard price for a game, but instead they were individually valued based on the effort it took. Now, to be fair, that is actually how it works today for a lot of smaller studios. It's just that when it comes to big name companies like anything from Microsoft first party, Sony first party, Nintendo, EA, Capcom, Ubisoft, whatever, we've kind of just accepted this free pass where most of those titles are going to be just $60. That's the cost, that's how it works. Again, with occasional exceptions because of how heavy things like microtransactions are, or if it is an overall noticeably smaller game. Price variances like this are beginning to get more common. For instance, EA's upcoming next Star Wars game, Squadrons, has already been priced at $40, which is kind of surprising when, it's an EA game. We're used to them usually trying to nickel and dime and get as much money out of everyone, and yet here is their next big title with a major franchise attached to it being sold at a lower price point. Probably because there's going to be other ways for them to end up making money. Like I said, DLC is very strong these days, but this might be a sign that as we're going into next gen, it's going to become more and more common that even big name AAA games don't necessarily have one singular standard price. It really is a situation where when I think about games having a price increase like this, it really does depend a little bit on what the title is. If it is something where you buy the game and it has little to no DLC and absolutely no microtransactions, something like, say, God of War on the PS4, I'm fine spending a higher upfront cost for a game of that size that is never going to try and charge me anything else. However, when it comes to other games where I know there's going to be additional charges hidden behind that initial launch, whether it's fighting games adding new characters, or Call of Duty adding skins, or whatever ends up replacing loot boxes as part of a game, well, I don't necessarily feel as great spending that same high price because I know that's not where the price ends. It's definitely a bit of a confused situation right now, especially because the only game we know for sure that's doing this is NBA. There is, again, already talk of other companies weighing this decision, thinking about it, whether or not they're going to start using it with next-gen titles, and even if they don't do it right away at launch like NBA is, again, pretty good chance we're going to see that happen more and more often as the years go by. And this then has the additional consequence of how much is a PS5 or Xbox Series X really going to cost you in the long run? Because we talk a lot about the mysterious price points for both these systems and whether it's going to be $500 or $600, but in the long run of owning a system, the upfront cost of it isn't the thing that actually costs you the most money, unless you only ever buy 3 or 4 games for it. As soon as you start buying more than, say, 7 or 8 titles in the lifespan of a system, that standardized price for games is going to be the real thing that ends up costing you. And it's not just games that are potentially going to go up in price. We really also need to address the fact of controllers. Controllers are usually one of the main go-to accessories people need to pick up, whether because they need to replace one that broke, or they actually have an at-home situation where they want to do local multiplayer, or they just don't want to have a controller that their kids use, so they have, theirs and your own. That puts you in a situation where, of course, you need to buy a controller. And prices for those have been going up every generation as well, and with all the new stuff going into some of these controllers, especially the DualSense, which is adding all kinds of new features like adaptive triggers, haptic feedback, and a built-in microphone, it's probably not going to be that same 60 MSRP that the PS4 DualShock was. In fact, we've already seen a relatively newer console, the Switch, launch with more expensive controllers, with the Switch Pro controller being $70, and Joy-Cons, where you have to buy a pair to functionally be one normal controller, cost $80. And that's if you buy them as a combo. If you buy them individually, it's $100. Add on other popular accessories like headsets, charge stations, all this kind of good stuff, the actual price of next-gen systems might be noticeably higher than a lot of people are initially willing to give credit. Because even if the systems launch at what are surprisingly affordable price points, whether that's $500 for a PS5 and $400 for a PS5 all digital, well, how much of that are you going to end up actually spending in all the accessories and games you buy right away that are at a higher price point? I think the biggest thing for me out of this whole 2K21 price up reveal is just that it's opening up even more questions about what we're going to see happen with next-gen systems outside of just the pricing of the system itself. And more than anything, I'm really curious if this is more of a sign of price variance coming back like older days in gaming, or if we're just going to be seeing a true price hike because of the fact that, well, inflation caught up to us. That's at least all the stuff that's been going through my brain after this reveal. Let me know down below in the comments what you guys are thinking. Is $70 too much for a game? Are you okay paying more because games are getting bigger, better, and fancier? Are you hoping that if it's $70, that means you're hopefully getting a little less DLC, which I really doubt for a lot of big games? Let me know down below in the comments, and I'll see you guys later.